Beef Wellington, one of the most famous luxury beef dishes. At the center sits a whole beef tenderloin, a muscle prized for its extremely fine fibers and naturally tender texture. Because tenderloin is very lean, the dish builds richness by surrounding the meat with additional layers. The beef is first seared over intense heat to form a dark crust that locks in juices. It is then wrapped in a layer of finely chopped mushrooms known as duxelle, which adds deep, savory flavor while absorbing moisture during baking. Often a thin layer of cured ham separates the mushrooms from the pastry. Everything is sealed inside puff pastry and baked until the crust becomes crisp and golden, while the interior beef remains pink, tender, and juicy. Chateaubriand, a thick center cut taken from the heart of the beef tenderloin and traditionally cooked as one large steak before being sliced for serving. This muscle does almost no work during the animal's life, which means it contains very little connective tissue. As a result, the meat stays exceptionally soft when cooked properly. Unlike heavily marbled cuts, the texture is delicate and refined rather than rich and fatty. The exterior is usually seared quickly over high heat to create a browned crust. After that, the meat finishes cooking more gently. When sliced, the interior remains evenly pink and remarkably tender. Steak tartare, a dish that highlights the pure texture and flavor of raw beef. Instead of being cooked, high-quality beef is finely chopped, so the muscle fibers stay intact, rather than turning into a paste. Because no heat is applied, the natural flavor of the meat remains clean and very pronounced. The beef is lightly seasoned with ingredients like capers, shallots, mustard, and often a raw egg yolk that adds richness. When mixed together, the result is soft and delicate, with a smooth, almost buttery feel. Tartare relies entirely on the quality and structure of the beef itself. Steak Diane, a thin steak cooked quickly in a very hot pan and finished with a fast, aromatic pan sauce. The meat sears rapidly, forming a flavorful crust while the interior stays tender. Once the steak is removed, butter and shallots hit the hot pan and immediately release their aroma. Mustard, Worcestershire sauce, and cream build a rich sauce that coats the meat. In classic preparations, cognac is added and briefly flambéed, where the flame burns off the alcohol and intensifies the aroma. The steak returns to the pan just long enough to absorb the glossy sauce. Porchetta, a traditional Italian pork roast known for its dramatic contrast of textures. The roast is usually built by wrapping fatty pork belly around lean pork loin, creating a balance between rich fat and firm meat. Garlic, fennel, rosemary, and black pepper are rubbed deeply into the meat before roasting. As the pork cooks slowly, the fat from the belly gradually renders and bastes the lean interior. Meanwhile, the outer skin dries and tightens until it becomes deeply crisp and crackling. The result is juicy slices of pork surrounded by a brittle, crunchy crust. That crisp skin shatters when sliced, releasing the aroma of roasted herbs and pork fat. Chicken Kiev, a breaded chicken breast stuffed with chilled garlic herb butter. The butter is kept very cold so it remains solid while the chicken is shaped and coated in breadcrumbs. As the chicken cooks, the butter melts inside the meat and forms a hot, aromatic sauce sealed within the crust. The breadcrumb coating becomes crisp and golden during frying or baking. When the chicken is cut open, the melted garlic butter flows out and coats the interior of the crisp crust. The combination of crunchy exterior and rich butter filling is what made this dish famous. Cordon bleu is a cutlet stuffed with ham and cheese, then breaded and cooked until golden brown. As the meat heats up, the cheese melts and blends with the salty ham to form a creamy filling. Meanwhile, the breadcrumb coating becomes crisp and lightly browned on the outside. That contrast between the crunchy crust and the soft, melted center defines the dish. While modern versions often use chicken, traditional preparations were originally made with veal. Ballotine, a deboned piece of meat, usually poultry, that is stuffed, rolled, and tied before cooking. Removing the bone allows the meat to be wrapped tightly around a filling. The roll is then roasted or braised so the outer layer cooks evenly around the center. Once finished, the meat is sliced into neat rounds that reveal the stuffing inside. Each slice shows a clean spiral of meat surrounding the filling, making ballotine as much about presentation as flavor. Osso Buco. A braised veal shank cut across the bone so the marrow sits exposed in the center. The shank comes from a heavily worked muscle that contains a large amount of connective tissue. When cooked quickly, the meat would be tough, but slow braising transforms it completely. As the shank simmers gently in liquid, the collagen slowly melts into gelatin. This thickens the sauce and softens the meat until it becomes tender enough to pull apart easily. At the same time, the marrow inside the bone turns soft and buttery, adding another layer of richness. Beef Bourguignon is a slow braised beef dish from the Burgundy region of France. Tougher cuts such as chuck are used because they contain large amounts of connective tissue. The beef is first browned in a hot pan to develop deep flavor before being slowly simmered in red wine. Over several hours, the collagen within the meat breaks down into gelatin, thickening the sauce while the beef becomes fork tender. The wine reduces into a dark, concentrated broth that carries the flavor of the meat throughout the entire dish. Braised short ribs. Cut from the rib and plate section, short ribs contain heavy marbling and thick connective tissue. That structure makes them far too tough for quick cooking methods. Instead, they are seared and then braised slowly for several hours. During that time, the collagen melts into gelatin and enriches the surrounding sauce. The fat gradually renders, adding more richness. By the end of the process, the meat becomes extremely tender while still retaining a deep, concentrated beef flavor. Pot roast, a classic slow-cooked beef dish built around tougher cuts that benefit from time and gentle heat. The roast is first seared to create a dark crust, which adds flavor to the final dish. It is then cooked slowly in liquid with vegetables such as onions, carrots, and potatoes. As the roast braises, the connective tissue gradually softens, and the meat becomes tender enough to break apart with a fork. The cooking liquid then thickens into a rich gravy that carries the flavor of the beef. Beef roulades. Thin slices of beef rolled around a savory filling and slowly braised until tender. The beef is typically spread with mustard and layered with onions, pickles, and bacon, then rolled tightly into small bundles. Because the meat is sliced thin, the roll cooks evenly during braising. As the beef simmers in broth, the muscle fibers relax and become tender, while the filling releases its flavor into the sauce. When sliced, each piece reveals a spiral of beef wrapped around the savory center. The braising liquid gradually turns into a dark, savory gravy that carries the flavor of both the beef and the filling. Crown roast of pork. A striking roast created by shaping pork rib racks into a circle so the bones stand upright like a crown. The roast cooks as one large piece, which helps the meat retain moisture, while the outer surface browns. The center of the crown is often filled with stuffing or vegetables before serving. Although the cooking method is relatively simple, the dramatic presentation makes this roast a centerpiece dish for large gatherings and celebrations. Turducken is a layered roast made by placing a chicken inside a duck, and then both inside a turkey. Each bird is carefully deboned before the layers are assembled, with stuffing placed between them. As the roast cooks, the different meats compress into a single large piece, and the layers slowly absorb flavor from one another. When sliced, the cross-section reveals distinct layers of poultry stacked neatly inside each other. Turducken is known less for simplicity, and more for its elaborate construction and visual impact. From crisp pastry and raw beef to slow braises and oversized roasts, classic meat dishes show how different techniques transform texture, fat, and flavor. Let us know in the comments what we should cover next, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.